Superman's tips for super health. Welcome back, everyone. My name's Chris, the archaeologist, and I mostly do archaeology related videos and Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider stuff as well to kind of talk about the real life archaeology of things. But today I'm just going to talk about Superman because I watched Superman 2025 with David Cornsweet and it was inspiring. I wanted to go back. I'm more of a Batman person myself, but though I love you know, I do love Justice League, Superman, Batman comics, things like that. So I decided to go straight back to Action Comics #1 and Superman #1, go through them, and I actually found some comics that are called Superman's Tips for Super Health or How to Acquire Super Strength, and they actually provide some health tips from back in the day. So I thought that might be a fun thing to look at. I think one thing that I really loved is this panel of just two guys going, one, I gave exercise after a few days, I didn't. Just perfect. Anyways, let's see how many of them there are and what they recommend. I'm also a bit of an old-fashioned kind of, I'm interested in old-fashioned physical culture, martial arts, and kind of early weight training, bodybuilding stuff as well. So that I'll give you a bit of context for what we see as well. So the first one is in Action Comics #4. So that's just 4 issues after the initial appearance of Superman. So this is the 4th appearance of Superman, I guess you could say. And the first one, acquiring super strength. They give a warning. When exercising, it's always well to remember that overstrain is dangerous. Be moderate in your exertion. And basically, the recommendation is that you do progressive weight training, but with furniture. So you start off with a small box, so smaller weights regularly, and then gradually increase the weight of these objects to, I guess, a desk chair, and then finally an armchair. And so again, progressive weight training being presented, but granted, the idea of progressive weight training is a very old thing. There's the old myth, Greek myth of Milo of Croton carrying a calf, and then that grows into a larger cow, and as a form of progressive weight training, strength training, I guess you could say. And yeah, what's funny about this is, aside from kind of being very functional in many ways, it's also a feature of a lot of early Superman comics. He lifts up assorted objects, but he also, I think in one of the old ones, I'll see if I can go find it again, but he lifts up furniture, desks, things like that. I think there's actually a fake Superman that lifts up a desk to show it off, and then Lois herself lifts it up in like a desk lifting contest to show how this is a fake Superman. But yeah, I can't imagine what in the 1930s, after a kid reading a comic like this, what havoc they would create for their parents, I think, after reading this one. And then a couple issues later, we have Action Comics #6, where we get the second acquiring super strength panel, and that's at the end of one of the comics. And yeah, basically clenching your fist, and then you just jerk sharply in various directions. You'll have a crushing hand grip. I believe today we have a similar view on something similar, but this is actually, it's very simple, but it is actually, in terms of 1930s, 1940s physical culture, so kind of early gym culture, for a lot of physical culture, physical training courses back in the day, a lot of it would be without weights, so it would be this kind of dynamic tension or isometric training where you're kind of providing self-resistance exercises, essentially. So yeah, theoretically, so it can increase your grip strength, but in terms of the efficiency of it, it's up in the air. But yeah, it's an interesting choice. Following this, we have Action Comics #8. So January 1939. And we actually get a very unusual one, because this one's not really strength per se, it's supervision. An exercise to acquire unusual vision as follows. First, glance at a distant object. In this case, I guess a telephone pole. And then glance at a closer object, I guess a pencil, and repeat the procedure. Do this a few minutes every day, and soon you'll be able to peer more distantly than your friends. So, I'm not an expert in, in vision. So I'd say this is kind of a mixed bag of things but from what I looked up, right there in back in that time period, there were kind of pseudoscientific ideas about how to improve eyesight. Uh, at the same time, more recently, there are more actual kind of vision exercises that are created, not to, create, not at all to create perfect vision, which is what kind of earlier um, pseudoscientific theories presented, like the Bates method. But today it's more about kind of training those who have kind of vision issues in terms of on focusing on different objects. So might have convergence exercises, for example, where you hold a pencil and you look at the object and you bring it closer to you. So things like that. So, there's in terms of improving your maybe eyes ability to focus, this might work. And interestingly, this moving into that this kind of ends there at Action Comics number 8 for this series. Going into Superman number 1, this actually continues. And they actually just repeat the furniture lifting practice, which again is very functional, right? Very practical skill to have, lifting odd objects. Now, moving on to Superman number 2, we have a little bit more information. We have Superman's tips for super health, and this is just a series of 4 recommendations for young readers in terms of what they should do. Exercise regularly, use the parallel bars, it seems, to do some handstands, get sufficient rest and plenty of fresh air, stay outdoors as much as possible, but above all, consume vitamin-rich food. There's nothing like cereals, milk, and fruit to give you that Superman energy. So, very interestingly, no meat. So, in these recommendations. But after that, in Superman number 3, we actually have a return to, well, a reuse of one of the old panels, the forearm training, the grip training exercise, and not much else really. Actually, in the following page, there is an entire separate, well, I guess one-page story of attaining super health, a few hints from Superman. And so in this one, we actually follow somebody who was inspired again by Superman, another kid, and they mention the secret of building powerful muscular control is regular daily exercise. However, avoid overstrain. So again, this emphasis on not overstraining. And again, that is absolutely important because the older methods from the 1930s, 1940s were kind of, in many cases, I mean, not so much in the 40s, but more so in the late 40s, but early 40s, early 30s, and the 20s as well. They all emphasize more daily routines, and which again is not how people train today as much, right? It's more strength training is more kind of every other day, one time a week, depending on which kind of regimen you follow, right? Whether it's more strength based, whether it's powerlifting, whether it's weight training, in a kind of general sense, or bodybuilding or weightlifting as a competitive sport. So, but yeah, more on moderate exercise as opposed to kind of the higher focus on intensity. Um, so don't weaken in your determination to exercise daily, which again I just mentioned. It's hard work to stiffen soft muscles into sinews of steel, but boy is it worth it. Very, very Boy Scout way of putting it, of course. And you have this beautiful, memeable panel of one guy going, I gave up exercising a few days, and then the other kid just going, I didn't, as if that is totally going to be so motivating sometimes. But yeah. And what's more interesting is that in the subsequent panels, you have this statement: in unity, there's strength. Form exercise clubs with your close pals so that you'll all benefit. So, and there's the guy again going, all together, fellas. And so, again, there's this emphasis on kind of civic duty, right? That is very common both among that generation, but as well in kind of the ideals of Superman, which he embodied, right? The kind of the greatest generation, the GI generation, and the fought in World War II, right? That bunch. Though I guess in the 30s it would have been, the people reading that would have been on the younger end, but I guess some teenagers in the years maybe from 39 to 42, they probably would have actually been soldiers. Some of the kind of you know teenagers that read these comics might have actually also been vets a decade later or under that too. So yeah, and then you have don't slouch, keep your head high, shoulders back, chin and chest out. You'll be surprised at the confidence you gain in yourself. So it's kind of funny. Then you have that kind of back and forth between, right, one guy who's slouching, one guy who's confidently walking. And I guess we kind of see almost a progression, right? So you had that, uh, the main person that we were following wasn't blonde, but by the end of it, you see a couple of blonde guys working out, and then at the end, you have a blonder fellow walking with his, posture straight up and impressing the ladies, I guess. And then finally, the final two panels, you have well-rounded diet is, of course, essential. Fruits, vegetables, and plenty of milk are advisable. So this time, the cereal's not so much emphasized, except I guess it is still a bowl of cereal this time. I thought previously they used cereal as in like grains in general, but maybe they did it. But clearly, kids, having a bowl of cereal and milk, and like I can't understand it. And I used to have so much trouble getting you to eat. Superman says we should eat what our parents tell us because they know best. Whether that's true or not, across every generation, I don't know. I'm not going to make comments about that, of course, because, Anyways, but this actually is not something you might see as much today, of course, because, right, in the States and Canada and other parts of the world too, you do have kind of an obesity issue. So, but that's actually the opposite of what was the problem in the 1930s. In the 1930s, malnutrition was a huge problem, right? Malnutrition of children who were living through the Great Depression in particular. A lot of things, just basic issues with GI issues were much more deadly, right? Than maybe even what we than much far more deadly than in any most situations today, right? Diarrhea and constipation were serious, actually, public health issues for younger people back in that time, as well as yeah, just kind of the diet as a result of industrialization, greater populations in dense urban areas, leading to slight declines in health, right? As different cities and populations adjusted to those changes. Um, sorry, I'm starting to sound like an archaeologist. Okay, which I am, but not the topic today. So, and finally, interestingly, on the right hand side, you have mental health is inextricably linked with physical health. Always do the right and just thing. Help others. Keep your conscience clear. That's super living. So again, it's interesting, right? Superman's ideals have this kind of mixture of both the physical and as well as the mental and kind of social element, all of it combined here, basically. And it's right. At first, I was like, oh, mental health. Okay, what could it be about? And I kind of, when I skimmed it initially, I didn't realize there was a lot that he was saying. I thought I was like, oh, mental health is important. Okay, great. And then, but really, it's actually condensed, right? Have a clear conscience, do the right thing, do the just thing, help other people, right? Just do good, right? Very much living up to Superman's ideals. So again, very something I think can be said to be necessary in our cynical age, I would say. Now, Superman number 4, the Spring Edition, continues this trend. And then, interestingly, you have another attaining super strength that is in the context of another person that's inspired by Superman, reading Superman comics to, I guess, be a better person or improve their lives. So again, there is an emphasis on kind of improvement, inspiring people, not just being this superhuman guy that can like, fight people or whatever, right? Which is so often the case these days. I think among some people with the rise of kind of the what if Superman was evil kind of themes. And actually, it starts off with, Tommy Blake, because of his frail physique, was often annoyed during recess by the school bully. Give me back my lunch money, try and get it. So it's right. There is also that classic comic book ad, reminiscent of that, of the Charles Atlas, if anyone's familiar, dynamic tension course where he has this panel of some guy kicking sand in this guy's face, and he bulks up, builds muscle through the physical culture or muscle building course, and goes and fights the guy again. So it's kind of emphasis, similar themes, right? But I think trying to downscale it to make it, relevant to the audience that's reading Superman. Of course, right? Who's the worst person to deal with when you're a kid? The school bully. It actually begins with a different person. So not necessarily Tommy, which we just saw. So one day, gee, if I could only possess Superman's extraordinary strength and courage. And actually, I guess it is Tommy then. Tommy's wish crystallizes into action. Regular exercise is what I need, and plenty of it. And he finds access to a whole gymnastics gym, it seems. Which, I mean, I guess some of these paraphernalia or like equipment, rather, would have been a lot more available in kind of public school system. Oh, well, I guess not all, right? It depends on, class and socioeconomic conditions, of course, and where you're from. But definitely gymnastics was a bigger thing in public gyms or ideas of gyms than today, right? This is, you know, basketball barely started to exist back in that time. And so, yeah, anyways, I think even for me as a millennial, when I was younger, as like in elementary school, I remember actually having not quite, such a nice setup, but having some old school gymnastics equipment, even from like the 60s or something. Um, if at all, if yeah, and also like rope climbing, like in our schools as well. So, it's not that too far for some of us, and especially for older readers who might be more familiar with, old school equipment being in your gyms growing up. And of course, as always, you have the old fashioned, no, not old fashioned, but the classic, diet reference here at the end. My word, what an appetite. And Superman says nothing can beat giving you vitality plus, vitality plus, wow, like good old milk and cereals. So really getting you to eat your cereal and milk in the morning. And later, the extremely old looking recess bully that he looks like he's what, mid 40s or 50s. Granted, that was a different time and life was harder for some people. And yeah, of course, Tommy goes in, leave that kid alone, and he rushes right in to save the kid from taking his. I mean, it's not even a lunch. I guess it's just. What is he trying to do? He's trying to just bend his wrist or something like that. Okay. And so, of course, Tommy goes in and just clobbers him. And golly, Tommy, how'd you do it? It's the Superman in me. So, very much emphasis again on ideals of physical training, good diet, good health, and doing good for people. This isn't even about, right? What makes this actually different from that like some of those other like fight the bully things where people like, get bulked up and they go like fight their bullies. This is more about saving people. This is more about helping others, right? Which is a completely different attitude, right? It's not so much for your own sake, but for everyone's sake, for other people's sakes that you're doing this, which is kind of a very touching thing, right? It's a very ideal, at least. So yeah. And then Superman number 5 actually continues that. But this time's more general. This is the summer edition, so super strength for summer living. And just very simple this time, just get plenty of rest. Another bowl of of that swell cereal. Eat plenty of good, wholesome food. Cereal was really all the rage back then. I mean, I guess it's true because in the 1930s, even like like outside of oats and outside of like oatmeal or maybe grits, I would say, like the kind of box cereal that you're used to, that you might be more familiar with, that was actually gaining traction because just a couple decades before, or at least a decade before, 1 decade or two. Now, off the top of my head, I don't remember it too clearly, but kind of early 1900s, you had the rise of cereal from like Dr. Kellogg, who created cornflakes actually for his medical facilities to feed people, and then that became later on the more sugary cereals that we see today. So whether they're referring to one or the other, I don't know, but definitely, uh, yeah, definitely such a focus on cereal. Okay, what's interesting actually, in addition to that, is that a lot of physical culture authors back in that time didn't necessarily always recommend eating cereal, like at least boxed cereal, because they're sugary. There was more of stuff like eat eggs, eat bacon, eat whole wheat toast, or whole wheat bread if you can, things like that. And if you're eating cereal, it's more like eat like oatmeal and things like that. So yeah, though I'm sure there's some old like physical culture ad where like advertise eating cereal. Like I mean malt drinks were advertised for that purpose too. But anyways, and then we need a homer to win this game and watch me get it. Lots of healthful outdoor exercise builds strong bones. So this is more, classic, American baseball and drinking plenty of milk. Okay. Again, very big focus on milk as well, in addition to cereal. And I mean, that was a big thing. Some schools and some would kind of give kids lots of milk. I believe even my father, he actually had like a liter of milk or something like that, something crazy like that. When he was in in uh, in public school. So yeah, then that was a way to kind of give enough nutrients to people, to kids, in a more accessible way, right? Especially again, given the time period, given the issues of the Depression era challenges, of course. Yeah. And actually, at the bottom of this is actually an advertisement. I'm not sure if it's by the same like comic artist, but it's an ad for, I think it's Ben Joette's books. He actually wrote several different books on like, building a mighty arm, building a mighty chest, building, what's strongman secrets, things like that. So it's interesting that there's an actual advertisement right underneath this entire thing. Um, and yeah, so and again, is more classic kind of fighting the bully thing. Yeah. And Superman number 6 also continues this with a very, very young looking Superman. This is a very interestingly drawn Superman, actually. And this time it's just called Super Strength, and we have the classic, strongman act of, with Superman breaking the chains by inhaling his chest. That was actually a thing, by the way. That was one of the different types of strongman stunts that would be performed, uh, both, for strongman shows, but also, which would occur in certain theaters, right? Which sometimes would flow into like posing and stuff like that. But it would also be present in circuses, of course, too. But this time, anyways, this time we do have Superman himself performing some of the exercises. Again, we have regular exercise can do wonders for you. And practice chinning for a few minutes daily. Keep account of your chinning ability and try to gradually improve. No reps and sets, unfortunately, but I guess a few minutes a day. But yeah, again, every day exercise. That was really very common back in that time. And develop powerful biceps. I guess just, again, very focused on the bicep. Rowing, chinning, and dumbbell calisthenics are good for building up arm muscles. So, yeah, yeah, I mean, rowing, chinning, pretty straightforward. Dumbbell calisthenics is interesting because a lot of dumbbell exercises back in that time period wasn't quite like the dumbbell exercises that we see today. Today, it's mostly, kind of doing very specific few types of exercises that a lot of people do, whether it's dumbbell lateral raises, curls, presses, maybe flies and benching, rowing. That's kind of the bulk of whatever most people would be doing. But back in that time period, dumbbells were used in more broad calisthenic exercises. So that sounds kind of funny because it's free weight training. Why would you call it calisthenics? So the strict divide that we see today, where it's like free weight training versus cable training, resistance exercises versus you know calisthenics without any weights, to maybe gymnastics exercises, that those kinds of divisions didn't quite exist. The dumbbell calisthenics would be actually very unique swinging movements with lighter weights even sometimes. So that might be why, right? Aside from it potentially being an error, it could also just be that. There were light dumbbell systems by Eugen Sandow, who was one of the first, pioneer bodybuilders, but also, I don't need to give you too much history for this. Most of you watching this not be as interested in it. But if you're interested, you can look up Sandow's light dumbbell system or Professor Attila's light dumbbell system. Anyways, so lungs, power, essential for stamina. Deep breathing develops your chest expansion. Another very old-fashioned, but old-fashioned essential, right? So it wasn't just, and this relates back to calisthenics. It wasn't just doing push-ups, doing sit-ups, doing squats, prisoner workouts, stuff like that people do. Uh, the going through the deck of cards, all that stuff. A lot of that was what was done before in terms of calisthenics was also breathing exercises, right? Filling in the diaphragm, filling in the chest, box to expand it, right? One of the big things that was a big interest back in that time period was the idea of being able to increase your lung capacity. And again, that what relates back to kind of public health challenges and issues. A lot of uh, no, there were a lot of issues with that for people living in the city, especially, right? The increase in pollution, things like that. I could be, more specific, but just kind of give you a general idea. There was more of an issue with or concern with that. So breathing exercises was very, very common. Uh, be careful never to over-exercise, of course. There's that, again, emphasize on not overtraining. Swimming is one of the best all-round exercises. It brings every muscle of the body into play. Aquatic champs such as Jack Medica and John Weissmuller were frail kids who became husky through lots of swimming. Right? That's a interesting choice, but yeah, I mean it is a good all-round exercise. Okay, so next we have Superman number 9, and you can see Superman, classic jumping out kind of onto the stage out of like a paper thing. And what's aside from talking about the exercise stuff, it's interesting to note that this panel it does say world's greatest adventure strip character. So again, this is Superman's the pioneer in kind of caped superheroes, right? You might argue that other characters could be superheroes before then. And of course, if you go back, I mean, you could say like a lot of Greek gods were essentially early versions of superheroes. But Superman's really the first caped one, the one that was wearing these colorful outfits and things for that purpose. Yeah. And so this is way before the superhero genre really existed per se. A lot of the other superheroes we might call superheroes would have been like Slam Bradley or people who are more detectives, right? They might wear trench coats and hats, but those weren't really costumes. Or I mean, you have Dick Tracy as well, but those were kind of pretty regular clothes that are just slightly different color sometimes at best. So yeah, Superman was considered, I guess, more of an adventure story character, of course. And this time around, you have again, they just simplify it to how to acquire super strength to just super strength, and you have the story of another person trying to improve. Actually, a group of guys trying to improve. And so again, this is a bunch of guys getting inspired by Superman to create what they call in this comic the Superman Physical Development Club. So we got the idea from reading of Superman's feats. Wouldn't it be great if we could do the strong things Superman does? Why not? Let's try. So again, emphasis is not about, Superman just being this otherworldly character that's super strong. He's an ideal that people aspire to be, right? You don't just look at the person that's being super strong and Superman. You're trying to yourself improve, which is another, again, very, it'd be nice if, we had some of more of that, these days, I would say. Wouldn't it be great if we, yeah, I already mentioned that. Okay, individually we exercised. Puff, puff. I, that has such a different context these days. Okay, I wouldn't think it would be as hard as this to get sinews of steel. And he's exercising with like, I mean, I guess because it's an American one, it wouldn't be stone. It probably wouldn't be kilograms. So he's probably has two 12.5 weight globular dumbbells, right? Very popular back then. So I guess it's like 25 pounds that he's like working through, which is great. I mean, actually, it's interesting how they have the 25 at the bottom too, but for another barbell. So, and again, no shame in whatever weight that you're lifting, right? That you're improving yourself in any way, in any form. But unfortunately, and the results were slow in coming. Are you still exercising? No, I stopped a week ago. Me too. And maybe if we formed a club and exercised together, we'd see to it that we keep it up. Then no one would let it down. Wow, very. I guess people did speak like that back in the day. Okay, sounds like a good idea. And later, I can't exercise today because no alibis. Alibis. Get in there and exercise. And then no street shoes in the gym. Okay. Yeah, so holding each other accountable, right? Having gym buddy to go with can really help. So, right, there are little lessons being taught in these comics, both in the story themselves, but also in these kind of self-development kind of panels. And yeah, definitely having a friend who's exercising with you can hold you accountable, unless you both enable each other's, I guess, laziness too, or just choice to do other things. Right? You could decide to go to the gym and then decide to go do something else or play games or something. But yeah, ideally you do that and tell each other no alibis. So I don't know why that cracks me up. I just imagine you talking to your friend, you know, and they say, "Oh, I don't want to go to gym." No alibis. Just I don't know. Maybe I just read too much detective books and Batman. But anyways, so cooperation did it, eh? Oh, we got Canadian here. Yes, united, but we accomplished what we failed to do separately. So united we stand. Unfortunately, that's all that I've found so far in terms of super strength or how to acquire super strength comics that are within the Superman series, like both Action Comics and Superman, like the actual Superman title itself. But of course, in between all many of the other comics, you have the classic, you know, comic ads of that time period. I guess up until even the 70s and 80s, I would say. I don't know. I guess 90s would probably be when it ended. But yeah, you had all these old comic ads, including learning jujitsu and wrestling and right and using chest expanders. Right, of course the kind of multiple cables with the handles on it, which has actually seen a renaissance, and I actually personally use them and quite like them. They're very portable, but yeah. So some of these are more hokey, of course, right? You can get an adding machine, was a coin recording bank, and microscope set, radio transmitter. You can get so many different things through a comic book back in that time, or at least you get a catalog of stuff. And you can even get a genuine Superman sweatshirt, which yeah, I've never. I would be cool to see one of these, right? Because this would have been like 1930s, 1940s, kind of a Superman logo, like on a sweatshirt. I don't know if any survive, but I actually kind of would like to see what it actually looks like in person. Because I mean, as much as we think that people back in the day really didn't, everybody wore suits and or dresses, or at best they would wear their shirts with the suspenders or whatever. I know more about the time period. I'm just being facetious, but yeah, there's a little bit more color to this when you see ads like this as well. But anyways, if you like this, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. And yeah, I if you're interested in archaeology, if you're interested in Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, archaeology, and history in general, you can check out my other videos as well. And yeah, maybe I'll do some more stuff on superheroes and whatnot. Just see what else I can find. Okay, see you next time.